In our world today, it's become easier and easier to compare the things that are in my hand versus the things that are in the hands of others. Can I remind you of what Scripture says? There are many in Scripture that were handed something and they trusted God with it. Moses had a staff that God called him to use. David had a few stones that God called him to use. Samson had a jawbone that God called him to use. Rahab had a string that God called her to use. Dorcas, that's a real name in Scripture. That's not me being rude. That was her name. Dorcas had a needle that God called her to use. Mary had some ointment, some perfume that God called her to use. Aaron had a rod that God called him to use. Peter had this net that God called him to use. And once again, Jesus is saying, cast your net. Church, I don't want you to look at what your neighbor has or what your friends have or what your other family has. Look at what God has placed in your hand and realize this: through faith, He is about ready to use you. Cast your net.